It's time we give back. Sow a seed and show someone where love's at. Even if you don't give a dime, give your heart and share your time. Help somebody else in life. Give back. Let's give back.
Welcome to this episode of Ignite, Empower, Transform, where we showcase urban superheroes. My name is Hosea James Givan, the second, and I am your host. Today we have a very special guest, very special to me. He's actually my godfather on the set. It is a pleasure to have you on the set, Godfather.
Pleasure to be here. Pleasure to be here.
Mr. James Darnell Bell. I'd like for you to talk a little bit about your beginnings, because you come from the same spot, same place my dad comes from.
Born in Gary, Indiana, which was the steel city, as they said, basically. We all knew basically that we had to do the best thing that we could to become educated so we could escape. So we all participated in sports, and your dad got out, went to Purdue. I got out and went to Wisconsin. And that started our careers, basically, and we've stayed very close to one another. And during that period of time, you were born. And I became your godfather at that particular point. And I've watched your father's career, and I've watched your career with a lot of praise and a lot of pride, as a matter of fact, and glad to be here on your show.
Part of what I think is important for our show is to help our audience understand some of the challenges that we have encountered over the last 50, 60 years. A lot of times we look at today's current situation, and we have somewhat lost a sense of what it took for us to make some of the advances that we've made. And unfortunately, we still have to fight that battle. The war is not over. We're still fighting the battle. And so what I'd like to talk about, because one of the things that, in me knowing you, and you've had a range of different interests and different involvements, particularly as it relates to business and promoting and supporting Black businesses. Can you talk a little bit about some of your challenges and some of the successes that you've had in that arena?
Well, interesting. First of all, I decided when I got out of the military that I wanted to find where my place was in the so-called business world. And interesting enough, I got my first position at the largest advertising agency in America. So I was the first, what they call Black management account supervisor in the industry at J. Walter Thompson Company. After which I started my own agency, and it became the largest minority agency in America. I then basically became very good friends with Earl Graves, and we launched Black Enterprise magazine, and I was the marketing director and the director of advertising for the first 3 years of the launch of the magazine. Now, Black Enterprise to me was very important, and I had to put together a presentation which basically looked at the advances that Blacks were making during that period of time. This is in 72, 73, 74. We were concerned whether or not if you called anything Black, how that would go over. But our concern was basically to do the best thing that we could to bring Blacks together. The interesting things that I found out was that America is a bifurcated society, just as it is now, just as the professional associations that exist in America. The African American counterpart basically exists, and they were called national. There's the American Medical Association. Right. There's the National Medical Association, the Black doctors, the American Dental, the National Dental. So we call them the nationals, and we actually composed a list of all of those Black professional people, and basically we used them as an enterprise, if you would, basically, and sent the magazine out to them, encouraged them to basically get involved. And what we found out was interesting was that, and it's coming to bear now, 1972, there was disproportionate number of African Americans in the middle class. 25% of African Americans were spending 75% of all of the Black American dollars that were spent, which means today that there was disproportionate in terms of wealth. We have the same thing in the general society now.
Right.
But the thing that's so very important is now we need to begin to understand and how to kind of recoup and understand who we are and what we can do. So we must discover ourselves. Mm-hmm. So we must find out where we are. I'm very much a believer in Pan-Africanism, so I look at basically where we are all over this planet. Mm-hmm. And so I've spent a great deal of my time basically trying to identify where we are and find out what we have. And I think that African Americans in the Northern Hemisphere, we have all of the intellectual capital. There are 3,500 black MBAs in America, as a matter of fact. The African continent, mostly West Africa, basically has the commodity base. It has 85% of all of the commodity bases on the planet, including gold, diamonds, sapphires, tungsten, everything you can think of. The thing that's missing from that process is what we call the third part of that stool is the work ethic.
Yes.
I've maintained that the work ethic basically is exhibited and manifest now in Brazil. People don't understand, especially black Americans don't understand, that Brazil basically is an African country.
That's correct.
More than 50% of the population, and probably as high as 70% of the population are Africans.
You talked about Pan-Africanism and
Pan-African, we're all.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is to understand basically how we can bring all of those together. And where do we bring that together? I think, and I thought that the best place for us to exhibit that was in West Africa, which is where we came from to some extent.
So let's take a step back. A couple of things that I'm sure our audiences, and I knew this at one time as a child, but now you're refreshing my memory, that you were instrumental in the creation of Black Enterprise, and those first 3 years were vital toward its success, because if it didn't get off on the right launching pad, it would not have gotten to where now, I guess almost 40 years later, is still a thriving, relatively, I would say not relatively, successful business. And Earl Graves is still, I don't know if he's at the helm. I think he passed it on to his son.
His son, Jamaica, yeah.
And, but it's still, but I just want to say how proud I am to know and remember that you were so instrumental in the creation of that. Part of our show is to try to create awareness and ignite, empower, transform, trying to ignite that spirit of where we need to go as a community. And we talk about Kwanzaa. We've talked about Kwanzaa on here and Kwanzaa principles. And the Kwanzaa principle that really resonates in terms of where we need to go in terms of your support is how we need to kind of support our own businesses, right? So that's not happening to the degree that it is. And I'm hoping we've had people on this show before talk about this, but you're coming from a perspective that gives us more historical background, and I think that's important.
When the Kennedys decided to politicize the Democratic Party in New York, they, based on what Earl Graves had recommended, that they start their organization in Brooklyn. So it was Bedford-Stuyvesant Restoration Corporation.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, that was the first, okay? I wanted to bring what I had learned in the private sector in terms of communications, because when you dial on the telephone and you hear that robot say, if you know the exchange of the person you're trying to reach, dial it now. Well, in a former life, basically, my company developed that technology, my partner.
Is that right?
Yeah, but what I wanted to do basically with Bill Harvey, who was the co-chairman of the company, Bill had convinced me when I came back from California that if we could come up with an automated interviewing device so that would allow us to call 55,000 people in 5 minutes and find out what they were watching on television, we could make a fortune. My agenda in that regard was basically to build an infrastructure so that we could communicate with one another on using telecommunications. See, at Black Enterprise, I always said that the telephone was our tie line.
Right.
And the telephone is the accepted medium of African Americans. It gives us everything that we need. It was free, and it still is. I mean, you're witnessing now basically every African American you know is walking around with a telephone.
That's exactly right.
So the issue is I put together a database company that I also had basically so that I had the name, address, and phone number of 85% of all of the African Americans in America, of all of the Hispanics, and all of the Asians. But the main thing what I decided to do was to bring that database, okay, to our telecommunications database and basically allow us to call people not only to find out, okay, what they're watching on television, but to find out what their issues are. What is it they would like to know? And at the same time, we would let them know just exactly what they should know. And that's why the whole issue is in terms of what we need is communication. I still think that's the key to the process, and we must still begin to develop those methods of communicating within our own community. We must discover ourselves, where we are, and at the same time, take advantage. It's free.
We're going to take a quick break, and we're going to go right into COINTELPRO. Thank you.
I see the future is really bright for me. The high school diploma is just added to the confidence, and now I feel unstoppable.
Find free adult education classes near you at finishyourdiploma.org.
Welcome back to this episode of Ignite, Empower, Transform, and we are having an enlightening conversation with a very powerful, historic member of the African American community, member of the American community, my godfather, James Darnell Bell. And we're going to touch on the COINTELPRO. All right, I want to go back into that, or go into that, because we didn't get a chance to discuss it before the break. And then there's a couple things I definitely want to touch on over this segment. Okay, can you share with us your insight as it relates to what J. Edgar Hoover once developed in terms of COINTELPRO?
Well, you have to understand that J. Edgar Hoover was asked, by the way, what he felt about what he thought was the biggest danger to the security of America. And he said it was the Black Panthers.
That's right.
And so what he wanted to do basically was to find out what their goals were, what their ambitions were, what their agenda was. And so what basically he did was to set up this thing called COINTELPRO, which is basically a ways and means for him to infiltrate the organization to find out what their plans were so that he could thwart those plans, or at least get ahead of basically whatever they were planning to do, so he could decide what it was that the agency, which was the Federal Bureau of Investigation, who were charged with the responsibility for activities of African Americans in this country. But it's interesting that the concept of infiltrating an organization, I saw it happen, and as a matter of fact, also, now we look in West Africa, where I spent a lot of time, and we find out not just West Africa, but even Central Africa. And that is that the concept of the CIA says where there is, and they're concerned about what the Jesuits always say, out of chaos will come order. If there is order, they will create chaos. If there is chaos, they will then make order, or the New World Order. So the whole process of how to find out where you are and where the people that you're looking at are in that regard, that's the same impetus that drives the COINTELPRO programs. And so that at that particular point, you really don't know within the organization itself who is committed and who is not committed, basically, who is ill-advised and who is advising. And so that COINTELPRO is still very much a part of what America is doing at this particular point.
I agree.
And we should be on our guard, basically, at this particular point, especially looking at now. There are just so many mischievous, so many different things are going on.
Yes.
It's very difficult for us to maintain focus to find out what it is that we want to do. But I think we're kind of getting to that point. I think it's healthy to have the kind of discussions that we're having within our community. But at the same time, we should not be so concerned about what it is they're finding out about us. I think it's more important for us to know who we are and what it is that we're trying to do. And if we can establish that to a point, it's almost insignificant in terms of what they can do.
Right.
Because as a matter of fact, that we are a minority, and we must accept that minority status and understand how we can optimize that position, because we are not a minority in the cities. I mean, rarely, even in New York, you rarely hear people saying that New York City is a majority population.
That's correct.
Harlem is a majority population. But there are a lot of cities, Los Angeles, Cleveland, Chicago, Detroit. You can go through every city in this country and find out we are a majority of the population.
Right.
So we need to address those issues in terms of find out how we can get the kind of leverage that we can, especially where our numbers are. So it's starting to happen. Georgia is changing. When they say the state's starting to change from red to blue,
Right.
it really means that the African Americans are speaking up. The African Americans are making their impetus known. And it's, again, finding out who we are and what we can do.
So, you know, that's one of the things that I've also been kind of studying and paying attention to in terms of just grassroots organizing, because we have what I believe is over the last 50, 60 years, you have seen our growth in terms of our political influence, right? And that doesn't match the economic influence we're supposed to have, right? So as we've grown politically, we haven't grown at the same rate economically. And part of what I believe has happened, I'm in the South Bronx daily. I'm a guidance counselor by profession. And what I see is a lack of grassroots organizing. And those grassroots organizers can also be supportive of businesses and promoting businesses. And I think on the grassroots level, we have to become more effective in terms of developing leadership there. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think it's obvious very important in terms of organize. I mean, that's the whole issue. We said basically don't get angry, organize.
Right.
And the whole
Exactly.
process, everything that we've been able to accomplish, it comes out of our ability to organize.
Right.
And the struggle continues, and the struggle can succeed as long as we can organize ourselves.
Exactly.
And so grassroots organization becomes important. I think now in terms of politics, they tell you what your street game is, your street games. But I think we're like a sleeping giant. It happened in Detroit years ago. It's called Operation Get Down. And Operation Get Down was like the Black Panthers in Oakland, where Get Down was doing the same thing in Detroit. And Barry organized all of the...
See, that's another thing. When people in today's world hear of the Black Panthers, they think of the images of those brothers with the guns and the bullets, but it was so much more. It was really about what you just said: community organizing, providing after school programs, providing breakfast programs. That's not emphasized. You don't see those images when you hear of the Black Panthers. You see the guns, you see the bullets. But they were more than that. In fact, that was the least of what they were about. They were really about organizing. They had to. Police brutality was at an alarming rate. If it's bad today, we can only imagine what it was like 50, 60 years ago. And a lot of that boldness came as a result that we're tired of being brutalized by the police. And so that's kind of, I believe that's kind of where that whole image came about. But they were really about grassroots organizing in the most fundamental way, in terms of just trying to make sure that we can support each other on a street level.
I always put it within the context of one of the things I got involved before I left the J. Waller Thompson Company. I got a hold of President Johnson's report on telecommunications 4 years before it was made public. In that document, it said that cable TV should be allowed to develop because over-the-air broadcast...
What's the year? What's the years?
This was 1970. This is 1974. 73, 74.
Okay.
And this was at the same time what was happening. Cable television was in its infancy. In fact, there was no cable television. In those days, it was called community antenna, CCAT, community antenna television. And after reading this document, my associate at that time, Marcellus Winston, and I decided to basically put together a proposal that if a franchise were awarded for Bedford-Stuyvesant, it should go to a local black-owned organization. And Phoenician Productions was our company, and we made application for the cable TV franchise. Morris Tarshish was the Board of Estimates, and he was the one that was handing out franchises in the city of New York. And basically what Morris Tarshish said, he could not give it we got a Ford Foundation grant to develop programs, and this is for Brooklyn. But at the same time, they finally said, if we give you the franchise, then we're going to have to give it to the Greeks, to the Chinese, and to the Jews, and everybody else.
Wow. But
that thwarted us for a while. But basically, we did programs. We did specific programs for African Americans. But the main thing is cable is proscribed, okay, geographically. And so that Bed-Stuy was the 13th largest country in America at that point.
Is that right?
Yeah, it was the 13th largest market. But the main thing is basically we still don't have that. And basically we need to go back to find out and challenge. It's too late now because they've broken all of the rules.
We're going to take another break and we'll be back.
Operation Wonder Park is a go!
There's nothing more powerful than imagination. But don't just imagine. Use STEM to change the world.
Who's with me?
It's gonna hurt tomorrow.
If she can STEM, so can you. Find out more at She Can STEM.
We're getting schooled today. And it's a type of education that is so vital for us to continue to make progress. And we're dealing with a gentleman who has, throughout his life, been on the cutting edge of change for and progressive movements for our community, particularly as it relates to the business community. So, Godfather.
Yeah, so let me say that when I basically, after Bush became president, things really changed in this country in terms of the funding methodology for getting funds from the federal government down to community-based organizations. Remember at that point that we had 1,500 black elected officials. We were like the governors, or not the governors, but at least the mayor of all of the major cities in this country, and we still didn't have anything. It wasn't about politics, it was about economics. And so I looked back at this economic issue and I decided that what we really need to do is we have 3,200 black MBAs in this country. So the question is, what are they doing?
Rachel's one of them, my wife.
Okay, what are they doing? They basically were trained to do things they're not allowed to do. And that's the black intellectual capital that we have. And where that black intellectual capital is needed and can be exploited and manifest is in West Africa. And that's the part of the stool that I'm saying basically. So I find that Guinea, I'm working with some programs now in Guinea. We're trying to, there are some grants. Things are changing in the funds program that's happening on the whole planet in terms of what they call the Illuminati, who's controlling everything.
Right.
That's now coming to a head. Things are changing now. Large amounts of money are about to come into the West African countries, not the Francophone countries, because they still have to figure out how to cut themselves away from France. But Guinea is one country. Basically, we found out Guinea and Liberia are the two countries that we're focused on, that we think we can bring these funds to focus and do infrastructure development and develop what we call a sustainable economy for those two countries. They're small enough so that we can get our arms around the whole process. And I think we are having some success now in trying to find out through trading programs how we can get funds to those particular governments so that at that point we can come back to America. And I think basically just welcome African Americans here who have the education to bring that to West Africa. That's where you're going to be able to do the things now. It's just the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing.
Right.
I mean, so many African Americans have no idea what's happening in Africa, and don't necessarily express any interest, I think, in it. But I think that's the future. The future for us is to link ourselves with Africa, but at an economic basis.
How would we engage those types of relationships for business in Africa?
Well, I think it's first of all to understand that there are Africans in this country, African Americans in this country, basically, who have contacts in several different countries in Africa.
Well, you're one of them, so
Yeah.
I'm talking to one of the leading.
Well, I know at least about 5 or 6 or 7 people who are very much tied into and well connected in terms of African countries. Those two specific countries, Liberia and Guinea, I say are the two areas, and that we're building an organization here, which is the Capital Region Black Chamber of Commerce out of Hartford, Connecticut, and that is basically what we're putting together. And if anyone basically can, I'll give my email, which is jdarnellbell@yahoo.com. People can get in touch with me, and basically I will put them in contact with people if they're really interested in finding out what their backgrounds are, what they would like to do, and how they might be able to contribute to this whole process of finding out how they can exploit themselves, how they can feel as though there is something, that they've been trained to do something where they're allowed to do it. Africa needs health, education, and welfare. The education part we can happen at the same time. And Brazil is also very important. Look what's happening in Brazil now. And Brazil is just crying out. Brazil is crying out for education. They have the work ethic. Black people in Brazil get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, they work until 12 midnight.
We don't do that anymore.
That's
in
the
this
work
country.
ethic. That's
Yeah.
the work ethic, and they have it in Brazil. But we need to basically move our base, our intellectual capital from this country where it is needed, but more needed, basically, I think, in terms of in Brazil and West Africa, and that basically people should now with the internet, they can make contact. You don't have to go there, but basically can make contact. There are many, many different Africans. But people have very negative attitude about shams and everything else that's going on.
Yes.
But we should use the internet now, basically. It doesn't cost anything to call and talk to people in West Africa and develop those contacts. I can help people develop contacts in whatever country they would like
Put
to.
me on that list. And
Okay.
put Rachel, my wife, is an MBA. She's got her she's one of those black MBAs that you just mentioned, and she's got her MBA from she's gonna kill me. It's a Methodist, the one in Dallas, SMU. SMU. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. She's thorough too.
Well, I think that, again, just looking at, I did business, that was part of the groups that we developed for the readership for Black Enterprise Magazine, was the National Association of Black MBAs. I don't know if you belong to the organization, but there it is. I mean, we have the resources, but we need to find out what are they doing. And you'll find out that most of them are working for someone, okay?
Right.
That's the antithesis of what they are,
Right.
basically.
Right.
There's a more direct route in terms of basically finding out where they're needed and what they can do in specific countries that we're talking about. So I'd be willing to engage Rachel and yourself and anyone else basically to find out just exactly what the opportunities are.
Okay.
By the way, you can bring as much gold and diamonds into this country as you'd like. There's no duty. You can bring as much gold and diamonds in this country as you'd like. There is no duty. You hear me?
I'm not understanding that. I'm not understanding that.
Every day on 47th Street in New York, $500 million changes hands. Neither the city, the feds, nor the state get a penny of it. Nobody says anything. That's influence. Where is it coming from? And I'm saying basically now that Africans are recognizing once you refine your own natural resource, that's what's lacking in Africa. The only place in country in Africa that refined their own natural resource, okay, basically, was the South Africans.
Right.
That's why South Africa looks entirely different from the rest of Africa. And what did they refine? Gold and diamonds. Okay. And gold and diamonds, 85% of all of the gold and diamond reserves in the country are in West Africa.
Wow.
You dig down 3 feet and you hit water, basically, you start to do this and you've got gold. Ooh, and at the same time, you've got diamonds and sapphires.
Wow.
I'm saying it's there. They're sitting on billions of dollars, but they can't get it out to the market. It's a challenge, I think, for the for those who've been trained in basically in marketing and distributing, and just taking advantage of the fact that how to get that resource, how to get the gold and diamonds here, basically refine those goods and then take them back. And Africa has the capital. It has the capital. It does not know how to exploit it. We know how to exploit that, so we need to put those two things together.
Okay. Okay. Well, I do feel that this is one of the shows. Now, we had my dad on here about 6 months ago, okay, and he came from a different perspective altogether because my father, as you know, is a community organizer, was a community organizer, and he was very instrumental in creating a basketball league in the community that we came from, the Hollis Biddy Basketball League. And so a lot of the discussion as it related to my dad was about that era and that time when he was a significant and I'll say very impressive.
He left IBM to go to community organizing.
Yeah.
I remember that.
Yeah.
I admired him for that too.
Yeah, yeah. So we're going to wrap up this show, and I just want to say thank you for taking the time to share with the audience this valuable information. I assure you that what you shared with me, I'm going to take and do whatever we can to support and help to uplift our people, because this is what this is all about.
Okay.
All
Thank you
right.
so much. I enjoyed it very much, and I'm always available. I'm on the internet all the time. I communicate with people all over the world, and so I'm willing to share whatever that needs to be shared. But I'm always ready.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Okay.
And again, thank you, audience, for joining us for this episode of Ignite, Empower, Transform. And remember, if it's in your heart, do your part. Today's help equals tomorrow's hope. I love our youth. My name is Hosea James Givan II. Power to the people.
Hear, hear.
I see all your smiles and all the tears strolling down on your faces. But I know all the while it's gonna be okay, yes it is. Just open up your eyes. Open up your eyes. The sun is soon to shine. Aim your arrow high and keep reaching for the sky. It's time we give back. Sow a seed and show someone where love's at. Even if you don't give a dime, give your heart and share your time. Help somebody else in life. Give back. Let's give back. Don't forget, the children are our future. Just teach them well and let them lead the way. It's our obligation. Help raise